England at any rate, and tell you a little bit about what's going on with the History Chap at the moment, latest work and things I'm working on, and also just to share with you some of the events that happened in British history this week. So trying this as a new format, actually trying this with what they call the vertical format, okay, so on my mobile phone, and just seeing how this works actually. So you're guinea pigs, I'm afraid. So yeah, it's been a busy week, I'll be honest. We had the Battle of Petropavlovsk in Siberia, which was this unknown battle or pretty much forgotten battle in the Crimean War. And it's very interesting, of course, because, of course, when we talk about the Crimean War, we very much focus on sort of, British redcoats fighting in the Crimean Peninsula, in the Black Sea, in, Ukraine. Russians would claim it's Russia. And certainly in the 1850s, it was part of the Russian Empire, as was Ukraine, of course, and many other countries that are now independent. Interestingly, Crimea wasn't a long-held Russian territory. They'd only occupied it maybe 80 years beforehand, conquered it from the Tatars, who were sort of originally, Crimea had been ruled or been subservient to the Ottoman Empire. A new acquisition. And anyway, the Crimean War was being fought in the Black Sea. But what was really interesting, and I've covered it in a couple of other videos, is that it was being fought in the Baltic as well, up in the White Sea, which is up near Murmansk, right on the very top of Russia there, where the Arctic convoys used to go through during the Second World War. And sorry, I'm just looking at that. Hello to Charlie. And Colin saying looks fine to you. Sorry, thank you very much, mate. Just let me finish that waffle that I was about to give you there. So the Arctic, the convoys in the Second World War went up to Murmansk. Those of you who are into, the hunt for Red October with Sean Connery, that's the area that the Red October leaves Russia from. And the British were up there as well, the Royal Navy. And actually, it's very interesting. They had a battle with a fortress, but it wasn't just any old fortress. It was a monastery fortress. So those Russian Orthodox monks, they're something else, aren't they? But equally, there was this long-lost battle over in the Pacific, the very edge of Siberia. You're almost heading towards Alaska. And the British were there as well. And it's very interesting. I was just talking with the Victorian Military Society a couple of weeks ago. And at the time, in Britain, the Crimean War wasn't called the Crimean War. It was called the War with Russia, or the Russian War, which probably actually is a fairer description. And equally at this talk, they were saying that, the key thing, the British were really keen to use their naval power to basically create a blockade on Russia. Because there was no way that militarily the British and the French and the Ottomans, let alone the Sardinians, were going to occupy a large part of Russia. The whole idea was to basically neutralise the Russian fleet and neutralise Russian power in the Black Sea. And whilst military could do some of it, actually a large part was economic. If they could screw the Russian economy down, they would bring the Tsar to the negotiating table. And arguably, the two things worked together after the fall of Sevastopol, eventually, and this continuing economic blockade, not least in the Baltic, where the Russian fleet couldn't get out of Kronstadt. That sort of brought the Russian Tsar partly to the negotiating table. So there we go. So let me just say hello to a few people. Richard Sweeney, can see you. Hello. James Garman, good morning from Houston in Texas. Well, lovely to have you here. And Pincher Geek said they had a nasty earthquake there a couple of months ago. You're talking to where I was speaking about just now, about that Pacific area of Russia, Siberia, Petropavlovsk in the Kamchatka Peninsula. Fascinating place. It looks from just a geographic point of view, it looks an absolutely awesome place to go to. And I do remember seeing trips there years ago. I guess they're not being offered at the moment with international sanctions on Russia. But fascinating place. Really like the land, the land that time forgot. But so if you haven't seen that video, check it out. It's a really interesting one. I've fascinated. One of the things I love about the History Chap is whilst I share a lot of knowledge, I have to do a lot of digging as well. And so, I love history, I love storytelling, but I love just researching history as well. And the whole Crimean thing is fantastic. As I say, not least because it was a much wider war than just on the Crimean Peninsula. That's where popular, that sort of, because it was all redcoats, and Inkerman and Alma were sizable battles. It's all sort of British attention at the time, and certainly subsequently, has been all around Crimea, along with a little bit of Florence Nightingale thrown in, and for those people who want to have a sort of Black History Month, Mary Seacole thrown in as well. And as I say, they forget this much wider thing, and where Britain's real power was in the 1850s was at sea. It wasn't at land. And we all know from like the First World War and things that, the British Army was always very small. And interesting, I was reading something just on that one, that people like Sir Garnet Wolseley, Britain's, very modern major general, the size armies that they actually commanded in the 19th century were tiny in comparison to things like the French and some of the Prussians, and some of the French generals were commanding in the Franco-Prussian War, were tiny in comparison to some of the armies that were being commanded by generals in the US Civil War. The power of Britain, and people forget this, was far more about the naval power than it actually was about the army for most of the 19th century in most locations. Anyway, let's see what we've got. Oh, we've got John from South Africa. Good to see you. And Pincher Geek says you thought it was a great story, the one I just did this week, and you didn't realise a British admiral topped himself. Well, topped himself in inverted commas, because as I said, the French believe that he shot himself while he was loading his pistols, ready for the assault. But and of course the Russian general, or the Russian admiral, sorry, he basically said, why the hell would you shoot yourself before the battle? If it had all gone badly, maybe you need to fall on your sword, metaphorically. But why would you do it before the battle had even taken place? So there's some scepticism there, although interestingly, the British Admiralty felt that he had topped himself. Although the crucial question is, why? No one knows. Carl, you're not late. I only came on about 7 minutes ago, so you haven't missed very much. So lovely. Joanne, nice to see you as well from sunny Norfolk. It's lovely to see you. Just whizzing back here. QA Library's on. Charlie Manson. Yeah, I totally agree with that one, Charlie. Sorry, mate. Just having a quick look up. Hey, Eamon from Prenton on the Wirral. I used to work in Prenton many years ago now, but I remember working on Prenton almost near the Sainsbury's. Is the Sainsbury's still there on in Prenton? Yeah. But yeah, so nice to have you aboard. And Robert Wallace from Dubai, saw your one coming through a little while ago. So Sarah Jane, nice to have you as well. Hey, I do like these live shows. And naturally, the bin lorry has now arrived just while I'm doing the live. It would do, wouldn't it? So how about me sharing a little bit of what happened in British history for you this week? It's going to be a reasonably short one. I'm probably running till about 2 o'clock today, 2 p.m. UK time. So about another half hour, okay? So what have we got? 21st of September. Ways back, that's Sunday, wasn't it? 21st of September. Andrew, I'm very well. Hope you are too. 21st of September, 1327. Edward II was murdered at Berkeley Castle in Gloucestershire. Strangely enough, just down the M5 from where I live, although I've never been there. Edward II had basically been overthrown by his wife and her lover, and in favour of their son. Their son, who would ultimately become Edward III. Yeah, Edward II was, what I was talking about there? Edward II's imprisoned in Berkeley Castle, and he comes to a rather interesting end. Legend has it that he had a red-hot poker stuck up his backside, which I guess is one way to, you definitely would die under those circumstances, wouldn't you? But yeah, so Edward II, murdered, I think, in Berkeley Castle in Gloucestershire. James Garman is on a roll here. He calls it a bin lorry, or as he say in America, the trash truck. Trash truck. Hey, I do like all the Americans and Canadians who come on the show. It's just a shame that at this time in England, my Aussie and New Zealand viewers are sort of probably in bed, unless they're insomniacs. 21st of September 1668, Charles II sold Bombay to the East India Company. And you might be asking, how was Charles II got Bombay in the first place? He'd been given it as part of his dowry. He married a Portuguese princess, Catherine of Braganza. Great story there in its own right, actually, in British history. She was married to Charles for the next 20 odd years, for over 20 years, never produced him an heir, never produced a child that certainly survived. Meanwhile, those of you who know your royal history, Charles II was playing the field and he had God knows how many illegitimate children, but he never had a legitimate heir, which is why his brother, James II, ends up having the throne when he dies in 1688. 1685, beg your pardon. Right. So Charles is given this dowry as part of the Portuguese government or Portuguese royal family. Give him, a few bits and bobs. We talked about this in my Patrons show on Monday night. Tangiers was one of them in North Africa, but also the Portuguese port of Bombay in India. And Charles fancied a bit of cash because he liked the high life, didn't he? He liked racing, and amongst other things, and women, obviously. And so he flogs it to the East India Company, who tended to actually be at this stage, their East India Company tended to be on the east side of the Indian subcontinent, sort of around Madras, or Chennai as it now is, and some other ports along that side of the coast. The west was very much a Portuguese controlled at this stage, Portuguese sort of interest. And of course they retained that interest with Goa right up until well after Indian independence in the 1940s. So the Brits at this stage over on the east coast, along with the French, very famously at Pondicherry, another colony that remained a French little enclave until after Indian independence in the 1940s. People forget that the French were there. They also had a tiny little enclave up in, suburb of Calcutta, now Kolkata. But at this time there were many other Europeans there. The Danish East India Company also had some forts. The Dutch were certainly there. And anyway, the English, they were all up that east coast, and they finally get this Bombay from the Portuguese. So quite an important moment in British-Indian relationships, all because of a dowry and a king that decided he fancied the cash rather than a port on the west side of India. There we go. Hey, Bruce, you're not in bed yet. Nice that you could join me, mate. Thank you very much indeed. It's only 10:32. Oh, that's not so bad in Australia, is it? Yeah, that's sort of that's the sort of time I'm normally still awake. Just quickly checking up. Thank you very much. Right, what can we move on to? So, I'll tell you what, 21st of September, 1746, just talking about India there. 1746, 21st of September, the French actually captured the British port of Madras, or as I say, nowadays called Chennai, in India. And this was the main British base. Even though we're now nearly 80 years on from the East India Company taking control of Bombay, it was still very much around Madras, and also they had a fort up in Calcutta. And the forts were really, rather like they were on the West African coast as well. As I say, it wasn't just a British thing. Most Europeans had trading bases and they had forts. Forts were principally a place to store the goods that you were both exporting and importing. And of course, keeping them secure. At this stage, the forts were not part of some land grab in India, or as I say, on the West African coast. That was to come later on. But anyway, so there you go. The French and the British fighting their own wars between their two own East India companies in India. And of course, this really ramped up during the 1700s. And whilst eventually the French East India Company were effectively eliminated from that race to control India, they did remain in certain small pockets. And of course, French officers were to continue to serve in a variety of Indian armies, Indian princely state armies, through the rest of the 1700s and into the Napoleonic War period as well. So those of you who are sharp fans will know some of those sort of stories, which are all based on a fair bit of truth. I just have to keep putting my finger here and spinning the chat up, but. Charlie, Mike the Disabled Welshman. Hi, mate. How you doing? It's good to see you here. Right. So we've done a bit of Bombay, we've done a bit of Edward II getting a red hot poker stuck up his backside, and a bit of early days in India, long before the Raj, to a certain extent, when the Indians still felt they could keep all these different Europeans at bay. That was to prove fatal, wasn't it, for them? Right, what else have we got? Oh, I suppose we should just have a nod to my Scottish viewers. 21st of September 1745, Battle of Prestonpans. Bonnie Prince Charlie, Charles Edward Stuart. His army has moved from the Highlands. It's moved to Edinburgh, and just outside of Edinburgh, it defeats the government army under General Cope at Prestonpans. Significant defeat. A significant defeat for the government. Significant victory, obviously, the other side of the coin, for Charles Edward Stuart, Bonnie Prince Charlie. Something like 300 government troops are killed, 1,400 surrender. A major embarrassment when you've just, you've got this gathering of Highlanders who've marched on Edinburgh. You send the redcoats out to duff them in, and it all goes completely and utterly wrong. The government force is broken by a wild Highland charge, the famous Highland charge, where they, these nutters in kilts and big beards and claymores and small shields come running towards you. A little bit like the Zulus and stuff later on in warfare history. Pretty unnerving, actually. Great when you can, with either manpower or firepower, hold them back to a certain extent, like Culloden a year later. But at this stage, unnerving, and the government forces broke at Prestonpans. And that laid the ground then for Bonnie Prince Charlie, Charles Edward Stuart, to invade England and try and march on London to reclaim the throne for his father, the old pretender, James Francis Stuart. So anyway, there we go. That's it. We talked about Madras. Yeah, not that interesting. 22nd of September, move on a bit, 1761, George III is crowned King of Great Britain. So, and Pincher Geek, you've just put in 50 years of Papua New Guinea independence. And you've said a story on the World War I German influence in New Guinea would be a good story. Do you know, you're not the first person to ask me that. And someone else has also said, can I cover the New Zealand landing on Samoa? Which, yeah, that'd probably be about a 10-minute video, that one. But hey, these little stories, I'm starting to appreciate that whilst I tend to do sort of 20-minute stories and go quite in-depth, actually just covering some of these things, not like YouTube shorts, the World War II in 30 seconds for the youngsters who've got no attention span. But, something like Samoa or Papua New Guinea for 10, 15 minutes would probably be really interesting. So thank you very much for that one on... I'm funny, and Raven has just come in with another one, which is on my cards. Any chance of doing something on the Australian involvement in the Boer War? Yes, I will come to that one. And indeed, with the Canadian and New Zealand involvements as well. Because these were the moments where the Dominions actually not only helped the mother country, but actually this is the first time that they were in active service outside of their own countries. Obviously, Canadian military have been involved in the second Louis Riel rebellion in Canada. Australians, quick to point out, were in Sudan during the Gordon Relief Expedition, but they were very much on garrison duty. They did lose some men. They lost men to basically accidents and illness rather than to Mahdist warriors. But this was the first time that New Zealand, Australian, Canadian troops went out of their countries to fight in a foreign war for the British Empire in South Africa. So yeah, okay, I'll have that one in mind. Alex likes the little obscure stories. Trust me, mate, I have loads of them. Oh, that's very nice, Bruce. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, okay, yeah. Thank you very much, Bruce. That's cool. Okay, few good comments coming in here. So let me keep moving on for you folk, okay? A video that some of you might have seen in the past. Actually, I've got certainly got Aussies here, but I'm not sure if we've got any New Zealanders. But 22nd of September, 1908, Charles Upham, VC and Bar, was born. New Zealander. I did a video about him. I did a video about all three men, and there are only three men in British military history who have been awarded the Victoria Cross twice. The first was, well, first technically is Arthur Martin Leake. He was awarded his first VC as a medic. He was awarded his first VC in the Boer War. And then in the second one, in the First World War, he was still a medic in the Second World War. In the First World War. Boer War, First World War. Then we have Noel Shavas, doctor, another medic, and doctor from Liverpool. And Noel Shavas was awarded 2 Victoria Crosses in the First World War. Incredibly, he was killed in action. He was actually treated, or attempted to be treated, as he was dying, mortally wounded. He was actually treated by, would you believe, Arthur Martin Leake, the other man with 2 Victoria Crosses. In the Second World War, Charles Upham from New Zealand is awarded 2 Victoria Crosses. So the last of the 3 men to ever be awarded 2 Victoria Crosses. And interestingly, the only one to be awarded 2 in the Second World War, and the only combat soldier, infantry soldier, to be awarded 2 VCs. The other 2 were in medical units. So great guy, really interesting character. Go on, if you haven't looked for Charles Upham, Upham, Charles Upham. Fascinating character, and he ended up farming again in New Zealand at the after the Second World War. Lived a long life afterwards. Was really anti-German. Supposedly, if you turned up on his farm in a German car, he basically told you in no uncertain terms where you could go. So a feisty man. And I have heard 1 or 2 reports which believe that he could have potentially been awarded a 3rd VC, which would have just been bonkers, wouldn't it? What a man. Different age, maybe, don't know. But there we go. So, and just on totally different, but does focus in on one of my other videos actually. Same day, 22nd of February, but slightly later, 1915. Arthur Lowe is born. Arthur Lowe, those of you who know Dad's Army, is Captain Mannering. And interestingly, of course, he actually had a real wartime service, served in the Second World War, served in North Africa, and then actually in what's now the Gaza Strip, served at Rafah in the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers. And he ends up as a, was he a sergeant or did he get commissioned? Can't remember off the top of my head. But I think he was just a sergeant. But he ends up acting because he was bored stupid in a radio repair workshop in Gaza. Well, it wasn't called Gaza at the time, but the Gaza Strip now. And goes on ultimately to be Captain Mannering in Dad's Army, which is one of my most popular videos, actually. It's one of the ones that's right up there knocking on the door of, closing in on 1 million. I think I've had 3 that are over 1 million now. Colour Sergeant Bourne, what happened to Colour Sergeant Bourne after Battle of Rorke's Drift, Battle of Omdurman, and interestingly, Hicks Pasha, which those of you who ever watched the film Khartoum, starring Charlton Heston. At the very beginning, the Egyptian army is wiped out. It's commanded by a British officer. That was William Hicks Pasha. And I tell the story of Hicks Pasha and how his army was absolutely annihilated trying to fight the Mahdi. And of course, that was sort of the Mahdi's revolt had already started. He'd gathered his rebel army, but they were going to be taught a lesson by the professional Egyptian army led by a former British officer from India. And it was that victory that really just galvanised Sudan as to say, blimey, this bloke here, he could be the Mahdi, the chosen one. And equally, of course, Mahdi's army now had loads of modern weapons, seriously modern weapons like Krupp's cannon and things like that, artillery pieces. The Mahdist army was medieval in many respects, but it was actually very well armed as well after that period. What have we got here? A few more people. We've got. Okay, we've got a little bit. QA Libraries talking. Got your Portsmouth bit in there, but talking about Royal Marines. That's cool. And Ravens talk about the Australian involvement in the Desert War against the Ottomans. Don't forget that. Don't forget that I also did a one about the cavalry charge, the light horse charge at Beersheba. So if you haven't seen that, have a look for that one as well, because that's a really good one. Well, there's loads of comments. I can't keep up this week. And Dinah's obviously wanting to be a bit of a dip. So there we go. And Bruce, you enjoyed the Sudan video. Thank you very much indeed. There we go. So what else do we have? 23rd of September, 1459, Battle of Blore Heath. took place during the Wars of the Roses. Again, I went into a lot of detail with this in my Patrons show. And I know it's not a sales pitch, okay, but I know I talk about the Patron shows, and you're probably sitting there thinking, what the hell are you talking about, Chris? In any of my videos, if you look in the description, there's a link to the Patrons Club. And all that is fundamentally, I have live show every Monday night where we really drill into some aspects of British history. Not always military, but this week we looked at oh hell, I can't remember what the hell we looked at. Monday's a long time ago. We looked at Blore Heath. We looked at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, Harold Godwinson versus Harold Hardrada, the last battle before Hastings, and in 1066. And we also then looked at a British treasure ship, English treasure ship, the Merchant Royal, which sank off the Isles of Scilly with a load of Spanish silver and gold in it that was being supplied to the Spanish army in as a payroll in Belgium, as it now is. And it sank in a storm, and it's never been located. They reckon it's worth over £1 billion. So, if you've got your flippers, get off the Isle of Scilly, about 34 miles off Land's End, and have a look for the Merchant Royal. So yeah, that's what the Patrons Club is. But anyway, so we talked a little bit about Blore Heath this week, which was at the very outset, second battle of the Wars of the Roses, which is a fascinating period in English history. Probably not necessarily one that a lot of you folk enjoy who enjoy the 19th century, 20th century stuff. But yeah, I'd love to go back and do a little bit more about that, either with the History Chap channel, or indeed maybe a secondary channel that doesn't dilute the two different sort of messages and storylines. Don't know what you think. So strange enough, 23rd of September 1641, the Merchant Royal was sunk off the Land's End. We talked about that. 23rd of September 1642, Battle of Powick Bridge, the opening encounter, skirmish rather than battle, of the English Civil Wars. So that's a good one. And 23rd of September 1779, the Battle of Flamborough Head. US Navy, or it's still the Continental Navy at the time, this is during the War of Independence, Revolutionary War. And this was John Paul Jones, Scottish born, but US naval commander, fighting the Royal Navy off Flamborough Head in the North Sea, and is victorious as well. So it'd be an interesting one to do at some stage. And indeed his attack on Whitehaven in Cumbria, attacks Whitehaven. There we go. 23rd of September 1803, the Battle of Assaye. Wellington's first big victory, first major victory, not the first battle he'd ever fought in, but in India. And this is before he goes to the Peninsular Wars. This is before Waterloo. This is his battle against the Marathas. And I've done a video about that. So, again, if you want to look it up, not that long ago, a couple of months ago, Battle of Assaye, Assaye. Battle of Assaye, all on my channel. Got a fair few videos on the channel now, well over 200. So it's a little bit hard sometimes finding your way around. I have got some playlists in there, but I think Assaye doesn't really fit in. There's playlists principally around the Zulu Wars, Sudan and Egypt, First and Second World Wars, Indian Mutiny, Anglo-Sikh Wars. I think they're the key ones on the playlists, along with just general British military history and British Empire. You tend to find they're doubling up in those. But there we go. Let's have a quick butchers here, because again, we've just gone bonkers. Mike the Disabled Welshman, I did different Stamford Bridge, as well I'm just looking here. Wow, we've got loads on here. Blanking hell. Assaye was celebrated this week by the Royal Regiment of Scotland. Very good. Thank you, his dad, James. Thank you very much for doing that one. Interesting, Carl. Carl's made an interesting point about World War One, for those of you who are interested in a bit of World War One. John Fox, Robert Peel's Bobbies. Not quite sure. Is that the story you want to hear about them, or you're making a comment for one of the comments above? I'm not quite sure there. Neil, what about General Lake's campaign against the Maratha after Wellesley? Well, do you know, Neil, actually, I'll be absolutely honest, Neil, there's a whole lot I'd like to do about that early stuff in British India, sort of, prior to 1820, prior to the end of the Napoleonic Wars, really, the growth, the battles against Mysore, the battles against the Marathas. So yes, on the list, just got to get there at some stage, Neil. All right. And John Fox is saying the 100-Year War. 100-Year War would be fascinating. Again, we've talked about how Edward III ever thought he had a claim to the French throne in the Patrons Club. But and Robrash, you're a viewer from India. You enjoyed the Rani of Jhansi video. Oh, that's interesting. Thank you very much. That's an interesting take. And interesting how different nations, we all put different spotlights and twists and turns on different bits of history, don't we? And you've made a really good point there. That the Rani is so she's almost idolized so much that it makes her feel like a mythical character. Yeah, that's interesting. And sometimes we don't have. Yeah, sometimes when we we put these people up on a pedestal, we forget that they are human and have human traits, like the rest of us, good things and bad things, which is always a problem when you make statues about people, isn't it? And then you want to pull them down later on when you find actually they weren't so good. And it's easy to do that with people from the 18th century, but even people now, footballers, cricketers, TV stars. Hey, a few years ago, there would have been statues of Michael Jackson, wouldn't there? A few years ago in Britain, there would have been statues to Jimmy Savile. Let's be absolutely honest. And now we probably want to pull them down. So statues are always dangerous. You don't have to be an imperialist or an anti-imperialist to have views on that one, do you? But there we go. Would I mind reading the text? D. Barker says, would I mind reading the text? Yeah, it's a quote from Winston Churchill. Actually got it when I visited the Cabinet War Rooms in London, which that's a museum, not personally visiting British government. It says, never was so much owed by so many to so few. One of Churchill's great quotes after the Battle of Britain. So there we are. Charlie Manson says the money from India built almost all the great houses in England. It certainly did. That and slavery. I'm afraid, Charlie. They're in. I guess it's sign of the times, part of the times, and don't forget, equally, times where we believe that children could work down collieries aged 5, work in coal mines in Britain, and things like that. And interesting, the same people with the big houses were in those games as well, weren't they? So, unfortunately, you can look back at history and not necessarily approve or think things are wrong. A little bit hard necessarily to judge it by the events and the people by 21st century standards. Well, at least that's my take on it. I like to think that if I'd been around in the early 1800s, I would have been anti-slavery, but who knows? I'm anti-slavery because I live in the 21st century. But there you go. Raven, that's interesting. One about people on horses. I'm presuming you're looking at statues, but I guess even in paintings as well, Raven. Charlie Manson, you are a naughty man and anyone would think it's Friday afternoon. Right, let me just tell you another one. Speaking of coal mines, actually, perfect segue there, Charlie, for children down coal mines. 23rd of September, 1934, the Gresford Colliery disaster. One of the worst colliery disasters in British history, not the worst, and not the worst even in Welsh history. One in Caerphilly before the First World War was worse. But in 1934, Gresford, just outside Wrexham in North Wales, it was 2 a.m. on the Saturday, the 23rd. A massive explosion ripped through the Gresford Colliery. Underground, just like 200 men were under there. They were actually doing a double shift because Wrexham were playing at home in the football that afternoon, and many had opted for the early shift to get a shift done rather than doing it in the afternoon. Massive explosion. Just 6 of the men who were underground when the explosion took place managed to escape. A massive rescue operation tried to take place. They couldn't get down there. There were fires burning underground. And in the end, 11 bodies were recovered. That's all, 11. And that included 3 of the rescue workers who'd gone down there to try in the rescue operation. The decision was eventually made to close off the mine, seal the mine. in case of further explosions. And the bodies of 253 men are still entombed underneath Gresford, in the Gresford Colliery. Quite a sobering fact. Lovely monument there now, as a mine wheel, shaft wheel, is a monument there in Gresford, where the pit was, where the pit entrance was. And there's a working men's social club next door, but quite a poignant place to go to if ever you're in that part of the world. The memorial, by the way, was opened in the early 1980s. There we go. Oh, what have we got there? Bruce. Bruce, thank you very much indeed. Yeah, by all means, people do drop me lines. Comments are a little bit harder to get into a dialogue with, but if you want an email, then please please drop me an email through my website, which is thehistorychap.com. And I do get back to you. I have to be honest, I get loads of them, and sometimes it does take a week to get back to you. But by all means, drop me a line with questions, queries, comments, ideas for future videos. All good. Wow, Raven, that's amazing about your fire in a colliery in Australia. Michael Taylor, nice to see you, mate. Yeah, we're whizzing through a few events. I just talked about the Gresford Colliery disaster. Ronald Pope that says the past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. They did. And I think we were talking about the Rani of Jhansi earlier, about sometimes we have perspectives that we have of history or characters in history, but of course there's always at least two sides. People say there's two sides to a story. I think there's a hell of a lot more than two sides, but there's so many different ways you can look at it, and so many different perspectives. And I just as an example, I did a video a while ago about the Barbary pirates based out of North Africa, happened to be Muslim, but they were Muslim pirates. And they were raiding the Mediterranean for white slaves. But they used to also raid back in King James I's time and King Charles I's time in English history. They actually raided the southwest peninsula of England as well. Actually abducted people from raided coastal villages, a bit like the Vikings. And were pulling people off. They also raided famously the village of Baltimore in Ireland, and they even went as far as Iceland, abducting white people to sell in the slave markets in North Africa. And this is at exactly the same time as the Brits were getting on the transatlantic slave gravy train. And bizarrely, the bit I think is absolutely weird and a bit mind-blowing is these Barbary pirates actually seized the island of Lundy in the Bristol Channel. Those of you who know where it is, sort of in between Devon, the English Southwest Peninsula, and South Wales. And they occupied it. That was like a raiding base where they could then try and abduct local fishing ships and fishing boats and things like that, and again capture the men. They weren't that interested in the booty, particularly. It was slaves. That was their market. That was their money, just like the transatlantic slave trade was. And here's the ultimate irony. They were on the island of Lundy looking for white slaves, and coming past them were ships going to and from Bristol participating in the transatlantic slave trade. That's a story we don't talk about, and I'm not making any political point there. I just think it's fascinating that these things are happening all the time. And of course, don't forget, there were rulers in West Africa who were in cahoots with the slave trade. They financially and power-wise believed they were doing quite nicely from the slave trade, not least the King of Dahomey, who basically, once the Brits had their about turn and suddenly decided slavery was bad, and we're a bit like reformed smokers in the 19th century, we were then, the West Africa Squadron was there, did a video about them as well, trying to stop slavery out of West Africa, not least by the Portuguese and the Brazilians. But the King of Dahomey, they basically said, you can't keep selling slaves to the Portuguese and Brazilians. And he basically said to the Brits, well, how much are you going to give me to stop? So, and again, not one of the stories we hear when we go to things like the Slavery Museum at Liverpool, which, by the way, really recommend. It's in the Maritime Museum in Liverpool. Really recommend it, actually. Maritime Museum in Liverpool is great as well. And Pincher Creek, the shores of Tripoli. The American Marines were sent to Tripoli. That's where the line in the Marine song comes from. The Americans, you're absolutely right, sent Marines to Tripoli to basically teach the pirates and the ruler of Tripoli a lesson because they were abducting American sailors. Interestingly, the British also went there just after the Napoleonic Wars finished to bombard Algiers. So, and that was sort of the real end came when the French took over North Africa in the 1840s. So interesting, again, another one. Yeah, colonialism sometimes has a positive, doesn't it? Right, anyway, we've got complete down a rabbit hole there. Speaking of colonialism, 24th of September, 1583, Sir Humphrey Gilbert claimed Newfoundland for England, the very eastern tip of Canada, going out into the Atlantic Ocean there. And I mentioned it earlier, but the 25th of September, 1066, the Battle of Stamford Bridge, up in Yorkshire, before Hastings. And for those of you who don't know your 1066 story, and by the way, if you've been watching King and Conqueror, let's just say story is definitely what we're on there, not history. Yeah, Morcar, the Earl of Mercia, I'll tell you this for nothing, was not black. Nor was the Edward the Confessor's wife called the name she was in the series. Actually, all in all, and nor do we have any evidence that Harold Godwinson's elder brother Sweyn was murdered on Harold's orders. So yeah, actually, we'll put all that to one side. Real history was that there were three significant claimants to the England throne, and not just three, there were others as well. But you had Harold Godwinson from the most powerful family in England, you had William of Normandy, and you had Harold Hardrada, King of Norway, who had previously commanded the Byzantine Emperor's elite guard, the Varangian Guard. Well, Harold becomes King of England, is elected King of England by the Witan. As I say, there were other contenders, but he was the principal one. And we all know that William of Normandy is going to invade England. And we know that because he comes William the Conqueror. It's in the history books. But prior to that, Harold faced another invasion. Harold Hardrada from Norway actually invaded in the north. And there was a moment in English history where you could have had all three of the contenders on the shores of England at the same time. Didn't quite work out, but only by a hair's breadth. But Hardrada invades the north of England, captures York. He's actually in league with Harold Godwinson, or Harold II of England, as he now is. Harold Godwinson's younger brother, Tostig. And Harold has to race his army north. Hardrada had already defeated the Northern Earls, Morcar, who, by the way, and Edwin. Morcar, by the way, is actually the Earl of Northumbria, not Mercia, as in the story of King and Conqueror. But they've already defeated one English army, the localised English army, the Midlands of the North, and that leaves Harold Godwinson having to race from London, which he does at an incredible speed. And he surprises Harold Hardrada's army. They're sort of sitting there thinking Harold's down in London, worrying about William the Conqueror rocking up on the south coast of England. And over the hill, Harold Godwinson, Harold II of England, rocks up with 10,000 warriors. And basically, the army of Hardrada is destroyed in a very long, almost a day-long battle, which in medieval terms is very long. And something like they arrived in 300 ships, Hardrada's army. They only needed 25 to take the survivors away. It was a devastating defeat. And just 3 days later, Harold Godwinson, resting his army knackered, large parts of it have sustained huge casualties as well. 3 days later, resting in York, he hears the news that William of Normandy has landed on the south coast of England, and now he has to race down south. So fascinating, and I would love to do a sort of a real in-depth on 1066, breaking it into the Battle of Fulford Bridge, then Stamford Bridge, and then Hastings, but also just all those different contenders, and who were Morcar and Edwin, and how did the Welsh fit in, and indeed how did Malcolm of Scotland, what was he up to at this moment in time as well? Fascinating stuff. And there was also a couple of other contenders. Sweyn of Denmark was in the running, related to King Canute, previously a ruler of England. Danish had ruled England for 30 years within living memory prior to the Norman invasion. And of course, there was the young Edgar Atheling, the last of the House of Wessex. So fascinating times, and indeed that whole King Canute bit is fascinating as well, earlier in the 11th century. But don't know what you think. Maybe you think just do more Zulus and Mahdists, Chris. That's much more fun. There we go. Oh, very good. His dad James, very good indeed. Like that one. So let me finish off the week for you, because I've gone over the top of the hour, but I hope most of you don't mind that too much. So we have, I'll tell you another one for people in my friends in Australia bound. Where are we? 24th of September 1764, Christian Fletcher is born. Christian Fletcher, leader of the mutiny on the Bounty, of course, famously played by Mel Gibson amongst others. And of course, Fletcher Christian, after the mutiny on the Bounty, they throw old Captain Bligh off. Captain Bligh, who ends up being governor of New South Wales, and ends up with another mutiny on his hands, the Rum Rebellion, which I am going to tell a story about at some stage, because I think it's a fascinating one. But William Bligh as well, the mutiny on the Bounty, I will do as well. But Christian Fletcher ends up taking the Bounty, and with some Polynesian women and what remains of the crew that were loyal to him, and they seek sanctuary. They find a remote island, Pitcairn Island in the Pacific. And eventually that actually became a British overseas territory, which it still is to this day. And they most of the people on the island are descendants of those mutineers. So yeah, there we go. Where are we at? 26th of September, 1087, sorry. William II of England is crowned. William Rufus, son of William the Conqueror, who we've just been talking about, is crowned King of England. 26th of September 1580, Sir Francis Drake completes his circumnavigation of the world. 26th of September, still 1887, Barnes Wallis is born, bouncing bomb fame. And lastly, 26th of September 1907, New Zealand gained Dominion status inside the British Empire. Charlie Manson, oh, you like the Rum Rebellion? Lord Byron, one of the boys in the NRL ID, a direct descendant of Fletcher. I'm not actually sure what NRL ID is. If you just tell me that will help me. Thank you very much indeed. What else? We're really at the end of the week, really. So 26th of September 1943, Operation Jaywick, of course, in Singapore, famous commando operation by Australian commandos, sabotaging Japanese ships in occupied Singapore at the time. 26th of September 1943. Fascinating. Thank you very much, Lord Byron. Rugby League. Thank you very much indeed. Oh, that's okay. Interesting one. And finally, let's get to the 27th, tomorrow. 27th of September 1888. If you want a real small Victorian war you've probably not heard of, here's one for you. The Sikkim expedition ended. Sikkim in the very north of India, northeast of India, up near Bhutan, right on the sort of the foothills of the Himalayas. The British were there, and there was the expedition ended on the 27th of September 1888. 27th of September 1940. I'll finish off with this one for you. The Battle of Graveney Marsh, so called. The Battle of Graveney Marsh, 3:45 p.m. on the 27th of September 1940, during the Battle of Britain, or at least during the Blitz, during the Battle of Britain, a German Ju-88 bomber crashed on land, Graveney Marsh, on the marshes on the south bank of the River Thames, the estuary of the River Thames in North Kent. Comes down near Whitstable, for those of you who are looking on the map. Okay, so the north part of Kent there. Crashes into marshland. The 1st Battalion, London Irish Rifles, are stationed nearby. They're actually stationed in a pub. Great place to be stationed, isn't it? And they went to investigate. Interestingly, their senior officer, Captain Cantoffer, what's his name? John Cantoffer, was expected back at the pub very soon, and he was actually going to be conducting a weapons inspection. So they didn't want to get them weapons messy or dirty up in the marshland, so they just went to have a look. Because let's face it, it's a downed bomber. The blokes are going to be dazed. They're just going to surrender. They know the war's over. So just a whole group of British soldiers rocking up there is going to do the job. Well, wrong. As they approached the downed bomber, A machine gun lets rip, the bullets whizzing all over the place, the soldiers dive for cover. Meanwhile, Captain Cantofer, because he would, has just arrived back at the pub, and he now orders the remaining men who hadn't gone to see the downed bomber to now grab the nice clean rifles and get up onto the marsh and sort out, take on whatever's happening up there. He leads them up there. Seems to be some sort of confusion as to quite what the crew of the bomber were doing. Obviously, many of the British soldiers believed they were certainly being fired on by a machine gun. Afterwards, the Germans actually said they were using the machine gun. They turned the machine gun on the instrument panel because the particular bomber they were flying was a new version, and they didn't want the instruments to fall into the hands of the British intelligence and British aircraft manufacturers. So they actually turned it, and of course the ricochets were going everywhere, and that's what the Germans said. Well, there were some shots rang out now from the arriving British, and a white handkerchief a white cloth is waved in surrender. There were no deaths, and actually the only injury was to the German commander of the plane, Fritz Ruhlhund. He'd taken a bullet to his foot. Hardly the Battle of Culloden, is it, or even the Battle of Sedgemoor, but some people will claim it was the last time British troops were fired on by an enemy in Britain, or by a foreign enemy in Britain. Personally, I'll be honest, I think Battle of Graveney Marsh is pushing it a bit too far, but it's a great story, isn't it? Great story with an even better ending, which is the British now took their prisoners and marched them, including the limping captain of the plane, marched them back to the pub, where in exchange for various Luftwaffe mementos, the British soldiers bought their prisoners a pint. So there you go. Only in Britain could you end up with the last battle on British soil ending up in a pub, everyone being mates after all. Says it all, doesn't it? And with that, absolutely, you had to buy them a few drinks, Charlie. Of course you do. With that, I think that's an opportune story to finish on a Friday afternoon and get ready for the weekend, isn't it? I hope you will have a brilliant weekend, maybe with some beers. By the way, the pub is still a pub down near Whitstable there, so you can go in. There's mementos on the wall. Haven't been there myself, but were they offer fish and chips, says Vince. Lord only knows, Vince, but a good part of the world for fish and chips as well, especially Whitstable. I'm off to Cheshire this evening. It's my son's engagement party. Woohoo! So he's doing it all. He's in the last 12 months. He's managed to buy a house, get his girlfriend pregnant, and now they've got engaged. So never a man who does anything by halves is our Jack, is he? And he's got his own business. Aged 24, he has his own gym, personal fitness studio and gym. Age 24, running his own business at 24. Didn't bother going to university. Well, actually he did. Survived a year and then didn't like it. So when people say to me in some of the YouTube comments, youngsters today wouldn't do the stuff that youngsters in the First and Second World War do, I beg to differ. I think there's plenty of youngsters out there who are doing great stuff. You might not be fighting wars at the minute. And actually, in many respects, I hope they don't as well. But I think there are great young people out there. Jack and Molly are two of them. And then tomorrow we're off to Ludlow. Well, driving back from Cheshire, we're stopping off at Ludlow. Scene of Henry VIII's elder brother, Arthur, Prince of Wales, as he was. England was going to have a King Arthur. Can you believe that? And Arthur actually marries a young Spanish princess, Catherine of Aragon. And they're at Ludlow Castle. They've been appointed there by his father, Henry Tudor, Henry VII, to basically a bit like an apprenticeship, ruling the Welsh marches, getting ready to become King of England. And there, he and his wife contract sweating fever, which is not a disease we have in England anymore. Actually sort of went out at the end of the Tudors, came with the Tudors, went with the Tudors. But sweating fever, as you can guess, massive high temperatures, and killed. And Arthur Tudor passed away in Ludlow Castle. We're not staying in Ludlow Castle. He's buried in Worcester Cathedral, by the way, just down the road here. And of course, Catherine of Aragon ends up marrying his younger brother many years later, who had been Henry, Duke of York, the Spare. And it becomes Henry VIII of England. But anyway, we're not going to, well, we might see Ludlow Castle. I've been there many times before, but we're staying in the Feathers Hotel. Anyone who knows Ludlow, great hotel, sort of Tudor hotel in the centre of Ludlow. Lovely town, unspoilt. Anyone coming to England, check out Ludlow. Anyone who lives in England, check out Ludlow as well. Bit of a pain to get to. That's probably why it's so unspoilt. Always the way, isn't it? So anyway, guys, thank you ever so much for joining me today. Plenty more videos coming out next week. I'm just trying to work out which of the ones I'm going to release, because we have Battle of Ashoe or Siege of Ashoe, should I call it, from the Zulu War. We've also got the Rum Rebellion in the pipeline, and I'm working on one at the moment. Okay, well, two in tandem. Brits at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and there were some, and Brits who fought at the Alamo. I think those are two cool ones to have, aren't they? But I hope you do too. But anyway, folks, have a great weekend, and I will see you very soon. Thank you for joining me on this live, which has been in the vertical format, as they call it on YouTube. See you all very soon. Thanks very much, folks. Bye.